everyone, my name is Mark Layton and I'm a solutions architect and I focus on the Microsoft 365 platform, and today we're going to talk about Copilot and the security needed around it. So a lot of people want Copilot, and but they have to but you got to realize there's some things that you got to do to prepare for that ahead of time. Okay. So today we are going to talk about, this will be the agenda. We're going to talk about the Azure OpenAI service and large language models. I'm sure a lot of people know about it by now, but it's just some things that I wanted to share with you, maybe some updates and things like that. We're going to talk briefly about prompt engineering and what is Copilot, kind of just to break apart the different Copilots. Then we'll talk about the architecture of Copilot and how to extend it. And then security and compliance. I want to focus a lot about that because it's really important that you make sure that you have your data in order before you roll out Copilot. And then we'll just briefly talk about some prereqs and licensing options, and then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A, and we've got some next steps we're going to talk about. So Azure OpenAI service allows you to hook into large language models. I'm sure everybody's heard that term before, LLMs. And so right now, the newest one that offered by OpenAI is GPT 4.0, and so that allows you to look across, I think it's vision, text, and audio, right? So it's really powerful. And right now, the Copilot that's integrated with Windows Copilot and also the Copilot that you can find in the Edge browser actually has direct integration with GPT-4 Turbo. And then there's also other large language models like the Phi 3 model. It's very small. And then DALL-E 3 is more for images and things like that. And a lot of the conversations that I've heard lately are being able to use the Edge device to do your prompts and have that the power of the Edge device, the local device, run the query in order the prompt that you're and to be able to get information back. So I've talked to a lot of people recently who want to have the large language models even locally on their device. So just some things that I've talked to some people about. All right, let's see. Let's go here. Now one thing to note is there's other large language models other than ChatGPT. So I focus on Microsoft. So ChatGPT integration with Copilot is something that's something that I talk to a lot about. But Microsoft also offers partnerships with other large language model companies like Mistral, which is a French-based company. And so one of the things, and I know this is a little bit hard to read, sorry, but if you look at the use cases, so ChatGPT is really good for like creative writing and things like that. And then complex mathematical reasoning is something that Mistral does a little bit better. So depending on what you're trying to do or your use case, you can use a large language model to help accomplish what you're trying to do, and kind of augment what you're doing. And then you see that Microsoft actually has partnerships with these other large language models. And then, prompt engineering. I usually use this slide to talk because a lot of times people ask, they say, "Hey, is AI going to take my job?" and stuff like that. About a year ago, if I told you that people were making money being prompt engineers, you would say, "Well, what is that? What is that?" But I feel like that AI is actually going to create new opportunities. So yes, it could potentially replace certain jobs, but it also can create, and at the same time, it can, I think, innovate the ability to create new markets and things like that. And we're already seeing that. So as a user, and I can tell you this personally, I've been using Copilot since December of last year, and it helps to make me more efficient. But the important thing that you have to learn is you have to learn prompt engineering. Now, a lot of people that'll look at this, they might think, "Oh, wow, prompt engineering, it's something I have to learn." But really, we've all been doing this for a long time. I've been using Google since the early 2000s. So when you want to find something on Google, you just go in and you type something. And if you think about it, that's a prompt, right? But the thing is, with the prompts that you can do with these types of tools can get really intricate. You can go really far with it. So if you say something like, "Just show me this email," or something like that, it helps you search and find. But you can actually do a lot more things with it than that. Right? And like content creation and things. And we're going to talk about some of that later today. So I also want to talk about the different Copilots that are available because I think sometimes there can be a lot of confusion there. And so the very first Copilot was GitHub Copilot. That came out probably about a year and a half ago. And that actually helps developers to write code. And I've talked to a few friends of mine who are developers, and they told me that it's really good. Like it can basically just kind of tell it what you want, like in plain text, and it can just spit out some code for you, which is really helpful. I did talk to another friend of mine though, who has a business. He has his own business, and he has his own proprietary code. And what he told me is that while Copilot is actually like GitHub Copilot is good in certain cases, it doesn't necessarily work. You still have to have a developer in the mix to kind of help figure things out if you have like legacy code and stuff like that. So that was the first Copilot. Then there's also the Copilot that's built into the Windows operating system. So if I click on this, this is actually going to pop up, and you might, if you have a Windows device, you'll see it in the bottom right-hand corner of your taskbar. Let's see if I can get my taskbar to come up. Yeah, so you can see it right here. And when you click on that, it brings up Copilot, and that's the Copilot that's built into the Windows operating system. Okay. Then there's also one that's built into the Edge browser. So that's here. Here's my Edge browser. And if I click on this, it's basically the same thing, right? And you can actually click on either creative, more balanced, or more precise. So when I'm doing I have to take certifications, and when I'm prompting it for certain questions and stuff like that I'm studying for, I'll click on the more precise button just to make sure that I'm getting the exact answer that I want. Okay, so that's Copilot in the Edge browser. There's one built into the Windows operating system. There's also one that's built into Bing, which is the search engine that Microsoft offers that everybody knows. There's Dynamics 365. So if you have a CRM like Salesforce or Dynamics, you can actually use a Copilot to help query around information around your contacts and things like that in your CRM. And then the Power Platform, which is Power Apps and Power BI and Power Automate. So a lot of data analytics stuff. There's actually a Copilot that's built directly into that. And then the one that we're going to focus on a little bit more today is Copilot for Microsoft 365. So the one that integrates directly with all of your apps that everybody uses on a daily basis, Outlook and Word and PowerPoint and stuff like that. Okay, and that's Copilot for 365. And I could tell you, for me personally, I use it, and if I take the cost, okay, so if you take an annual cost of what it is, I could tell you that for me personally, how much it's actually saved me in the last 6 or 7 months that I've been using it is already well paid for it, and so anything I get for the rest of the year out of it is actually just going to be what I'll consider profit, right? Because it helps me gain efficiencies. It actually helps me. It gives me more time, and personally in my work, what I end up having to do, we work in a ticketing system called Jira, and so I actually have to go take tickets. So being more efficient has allowed me to have more time to actually just take more tickets. I can just do more work because it just helps me be more efficient as I go about my day. And I'll talk about some examples in a little while. I don't want to get too technical here, but I do want to mention this is the conversation that I have with people all the time. And this, I worked with a large university in the state of Alabama a few months back, actually all the way back in February, and they were talking about how they were using ChatGPT to help them in a lot of different areas of what they were doing, their research and their development and stuff like that. But what they realized is that ChatGPT, that data is actually going out to train the large language model. Now, there's no problem with that if your data is not important enough to you where it's like proprietary data. But let me give an example. Like my wife works for a Fortune 500 company here in the Greenville, South Carolina area where I live, and I'll just tell you, she works for Michelin. And they make, I think, some of the best tires in the world. And a lot of the data that they have, they really keep it contained because it's proprietary data, right? They don't want their competitors to get that information. So if they have people in their organization that are prompting and they're pushing out information to the large language model, that can be like not good for your company, right? So the most important thing to note is with this is that Copilot integrates directly with the large language model, and the only thing that goes out to the large language model is your prompt. Okay, so your data is contained inside the boundary of your tenant. That's why Copilot is so powerful, because it has the power of the large language model. Today it's ChatGPT GPT-4 Turbo, but you get to keep your data inside your tenant. Everything stays inside what we call the tenant or the Microsoft graph. Everything's contained, all right? And then I'm going to break some of this apart here in a minute, some of the things that you can do to contain that data even within the tenant. So now you don't have it going out to public access, right, to ChatGPT and the large language models, but you also want to try to contain that internally. You don't want Copilot to be like, hey, let me see these social security numbers from HR or something like that. So for example, we went through at my company back in October of last year in preparation for Copilot that we rolled out in December of last year to a pilot group of 300 people. we went through a data governance exercise. And so the very first prompt that I did when I got Copilot was, my manager's name is John Peterson. So my very first prompt was, what is John Peterson's salary? And I did that not because I want to know my manager's salary. I really don't care. I just wanted to try to break it. And I wasn't able to, because our company went through a data governance strategy to make sure that I only had access to the things that I should have access to. Because I can tell you that you have access today to things that you don't realize you have, and Copilot will go find that. Now, inside, let me just show you this one other thing. We're talking about the tenant and your data. We're talking about the Microsoft Graph, and that's all of the data in the tenant. Okay, that's usually OneDrive, SharePoint, Exchange, anything else that you have in the tenant natively. Okay, and you can see here on this chart, it could be Dataverse, so that's like Power Platform stuff. You might have Dynamics 365 stuff in there, or some sort of data, and that's native to Microsoft. If you want Copilot to be able to reason over that data, you can have plugins and extensions as well. Okay, you can integrate things directly into Teams. You can bring in Power Platform connectors. A real common request that I see is, hey, I want Copilot to be able to reason over data that I have in an on-prem file share. Like, we're not comfortable putting some of our proprietary data in the cloud. We have it in an on-prem file share. How can I get access to that? And it's really easy. You just set up a connector there. And when you do that, you can have people searching, and let's say they use some of their data in OneDrive, some in SharePoint, you've got your data in Exchange, your email, and then you can set up a connection so that people can search data in an on-prem file share, for example, or a SQL Server database. So you can do that. Copilot can do that. And then another thing you can do is if Copilot out of the box is very powerful, well, if it won't do everything that you need it to do, you can actually get it to you can create your own Copilot. That can, and it could be a specific business case or something exactly for what you need. And so, for example, one of the things that we're doing here internally that we're talking about is, I work as part of our engineering group, and we have to take tickets, right, as we're doing our work. So we use a ticketing system called Jira. So we've come up with a use case that we're working on right now to try to integrate Jira into Teams, and even more specifically with Copilot, so that I could go into Copilot and I could just say, hey, what are my last 5 Jira tickets? And they would list them right there within Teams. I wouldn't have to leave that app. I wouldn't have to go into the Jira app. And then I could say something like, well, okay, those all look good, close those 5 tickets. And it could just be automated. So really cool efficiencies that you can do across even applications that don't, aren't just native to Microsoft, right? So the power of Copilot is, and I'll start here in the middle. It's your data. That's the most important thing, your data. Then you have the M365 apps to kind of interface with that data. And then together, Copilot works with the large language model, ChatGPT 4 Turbo, or another large language model if you connect to that. And then it can also use the power of the internet. So when I'm going to do my prompt, I can actually select, look for search web content. So it'll scrape the internet too, and it can look for information to bring back a response. Okay, so this is the part that people usually want to talk about because, so for example, I'll give a real quick use case. I have a personal device, my workstation at home, that it's mine, and I at one point in time I was using that for some testing, and I had it connected to a demo tenant, and we had a OneDrive. Okay, I had it connected to my OneDrive. I do my personal taxes on my personal home computer, which most people do. I didn't realize, but my TurboTax document actually synced to OneDrive in our demo tenant, and that was back in 2022. And we got Copilot, and in our demo tenant, my manager John actually reached out to me, and he was like, "Hey man, I found a social security a document with your social security number and all your tax information." And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, I just Copilot found it." And I was like, "Whoa, okay." So I actually had to go into the demo tenant and start doing some prompts and started finding some documents that I really did not want other people to have access to, like my social security document, right? I'm sorry, my social security number was on my tax return. And so that's just a use case example, and it's a personal use case. But if you think of that in the business world, that could be personally identifiable information like credit cards or social security numbers. It could be HR salaries, and you can run the gamut there of what could be contained in data that maybe the HR group should have access to that other people can't. So one of the things that I talk to people about is, how can you set up your security and compliance controls and data governance in preparation for Copilot? All right, so let's start that conversation. Obviously, it's important, okay, because you might have confidential data, proprietary data, customer data. There could be third parties that are integrating with your data. You want to control the access to that, and there, you have to kind of like architect that. So either you have today, you've got a data governance strategy in place and you're doing that. And if you want to roll out Copilot, then what you'd probably want to do is just do an audit to make sure that you have everything in place. If you don't, then you're probably going to want to go ahead and do a full audit and say, okay, we need to get our data governance strategy in place before we roll out Copilot. That's definitely the first step, okay? So we want to look at it from a security perspective. We want to make sure that our compliance is in order, because we have, think about it, if you're a HIPAA compliant company, right, we'll just use that as an example, you can't be having people like, you can't get like people's healthcare data like outside of the tenant. Like somebody shouldn't get access to that. Or like, for example, there are certain people that shouldn't have access to data even in the organization, right? So like, for instance, if I was in the IT department, I shouldn't be able to see a patient's healthcare records. There's just no reason for me to see that, right? So there's things you have to set up there, okay? And then of course there's the privacy, and then Microsoft promises the responsibility AI model, which says, hey, your data is not used to train the large language model. Your data will stay contained inside the boundary of your tenant, and they're making that commitment. Okay, so there's a few things. Let's talk about this in different buckets. There's about 4 buckets that I want to talk about, and then some of the tools that Microsoft offers. So there's Intra ID, which used to be called Azure AD. That's the source of identity for users and devices in the tenant. Okay, so if we're talking about it from that perspective, it is making sure that, if you guys are familiar with what's called the zero trust model, every single time that someone logs into the Microsoft service, we want to make sure that that person actually is who they say they are. So, and we're going to verify that explicitly. Okay, so that's part of it. Hey, who's ever in front of the computer, that's Mark's computer, and we know that that's Mark. Okay, that's one thing down. Okay, now number 2, you want to look at things through a device perspective. Make sure that that Mark's device is not compromised in any way. Make sure that Mark can use his device the way that he needs to use it to do his job, but just enough power to where he doesn't break something. Okay, so there's controls with Microsoft Intune. Then this goes around your data. Think of it like as protections around your data. You have purview and information protection. Now, what I tell people is this is just me, right? If I'm looking at data from a black and a white perspective, you're going to have data that only certain people should have access to, and it needs to be completely contained. And the best use case of that is probably HR, okay? Your HR documents are going to be contained, and only a certain group of people are going to be able to see that. Social security numbers, salary, and things like that. I know I've already used that as an example, but I'm just using it again. So let's contain that data. But then what we could do is we could also say, okay, anything else that the organization can see is open, and the reason for that is because that allows for sharing of information. So for example, if I go into my Copilot right now and I say, show me presentations around Copilot, I will find some that I've done, but I will probably also find other ones in my organization that are just open content that somebody would show, and it would be public-facing documents, so I could have access to it. So it allows for open sharing of information. So anything that should be open and can be open, that people should get access to that. It's open and free sharing. So a good example of that would be something like, let's say you have, I don't know, let me just use an example. Let's say if you have like, hey, every day these are the days that we have off this year that everybody can get off for vacation, right? All right, and then finally the 4th one. Sorry, I'm probably spending too much time here on I've got breakout slides for this, but the last one is Defender for Cloud Apps. So making sure that your applications are secure, making sure that the applications in your environment are the ones that you actually want to be using. So you don't want people downloading like TikTok to a corporate issued device. Okay, that's just not what I would want in my environment. Okay, so number 1, let's break this apart, right? Again, Intra, right? We want to make sure that these are some of the things that we're going to break apart here, right? We want to give only access. Well, first of all, we want to make sure and contain a user's access and give them only access to the resources to do their job. So allow or deny access based on group membership or conditional access policies. So for example, because I spend a lot of time focusing on Intune, because I focus on Intune and device management. So I'll look at this through the device side. A conditional access policy might say, we only want our users to connect to corporate resources using a Windows-based device or a Mac device if that's what they're using. And so you can, at the platform level, block that through a conditional access policy. Another thing you can do is you can require MFA. So you can require blanket MFA for everybody, which is highly recommended. And then if you have access, let's say there are like, and I'll use HR, maybe not HR, I'll use the financial organization. Let's say there's like QuickBooks, for example. Let's say there's a really sensitive resource in your environment that has really information in it that only certain people should have access to. You could even pare it down to, you could say, okay, only people in this group, so that it could be 5 out of 10 people, right? Say 5 to 10 people. And then whenever anybody goes to access that, we're actually going to throw another multi-factor gate. We're going to make you multi-factor before you get in there, okay? So again, looking at this from this perspective is we're going to secure this around the user, okay? We're making sure the user is who they say they are and verify that explicitly, okay? Now, from a device perspective, here's another thing that we'll do. Here's a real-world use case that people come and ask me for all the time. They'll say, hey, we are in the HIPAA. Like, I work with all different verticals. So a real good example of that is HIPAA compliance. HIPAA does not like, from a compliance perspective, they don't like devices to have data saved on the local drive. So I'm hearing all the time, okay, you get an Android device, and after the nurse uses, or the hospital staff uses this shared device, when they dock it, it needs to be wiped, right? And I've seen solutions like that, like just completely wipe everything so nobody can get access to that data. Another one might be if I'm using a Windows device, I want to disallow anyone or prevent anyone from saving data to the local drive. Okay, because if they do that and the device gets lost or stolen, someone could get access to data. It could be proprietary data, personal data, things like that. So at the device level, you can lock things down and make it to where the user has to be within the compliance policies of what you do to make sure what your company requires in order to keep your data safe, if you will, around Copilot and searching and things like that. Another one would be like requiring our devices to be encrypted, and you can do that through something called BitLocker. So all of these policies and these controls can be done through Intune, and all of it is for the protection of the company and your data and the devices themselves, but it's also helpful when we're talking about it from a standpoint of Copilot. Okay, so number 3, and this is probably the most important, because let me tell you why. I'm sure all of us have heard of something called ransomware, right? And people, and I've seen this before, people are literally willing to pay millions of dollars to get back their data, because if you took my company's data away from us today, there's a good chance that we might not make it. And most companies would probably go under if they didn't have the access to their data. They can't do their job. They can't run their business. So it's very important. So it's a very important consideration, the protection of your data. And you can you can protect that through things like purview information protection. So setting up sensitivity labels to make sure people aren't sharing outside of the organization, things like that. And so the protection of your data is really important, and Purview is the tools that Microsoft offers for that. Okay, and then when you're looking at it from a Copilot perspective, is if you have these protections in place, then as people are searching over the data, they will only have access to what they should have access to. And I highly recommend that you, at the minimum, if you already have these in place, is consider doing an audit to make sure that you might have some features that you haven't implemented yet that your licensing already offers, and you just need to implement them. A common one would be like data loss prevention policies across your organization. That would be like preventing people from sharing social security numbers and things across. And like I've seen a demo of this where someone goes and types a 16-digit code, which would indicate a credit card number, and they go to click enter, and it literally says you can't share this through Teams, right? So something like that. And then finally, the last one would be looking at it from because what we've talked about now is we've talked about the user, we've talked about the device, and we talked about the data. Now let's talk about applications, okay? There's something called Defender for Cloud Apps, and what it can allow you to do is take a snapshot of your apps in your organization, and you might not even know. People might be accessing, they might be using ChatGPT, or they might be using TikTok or something like that on a corporate issue device. You can block that, you can find it, and you can get rid of it. You can do things with that like through Intune. You can do it with Defender for Cloud Apps. And another thing you can do is you can take, if you're evaluating an application for your organization, you could say, hey, we want to use this application, but does it meet our compliance requirements? Like, will it meet HIPAA requirement or things like that? And so if you have if you have this Defender for Cloud Apps, you can look across your applications and you can actually see at the app layer which applications meet which compliance requirements, whether it's HIPAA or NIST or any of those requirements, depending on what vertical you're in, you'll have different requirements around your compliance and things like that. Okay, so that's pretty much it, right? Users, devices, data, apps. Have that all like, make sure this is your data governance strategy. Have a strategy, and then once you've put that into place, you can be confident that when you work with Copilot, number one, Microsoft is making a commitment to make sure your data is not going out to train the large language model, and then your company is ready to roll out Copilot. All right, so some of the things you're going to want to do, and this would be like, this is just kind of like a to-do list, right? We're going to want to do a licensing review and a data governance audit like we talked about, ensure the users have the appropriate licensing in place based on the controls that you want. And again, either you have data governance in place or you don't, so you're going to want a strategy for that either way. And if you do have data governance in place, maybe do an audit to figure out whether make sure you have everything you need. Then what we see people doing is right now is you might, if you have the budget for it and you have the desire to do it, you have 100 people in your organization, you say, hey, we're just going to roll out Copilot for everybody and we're just going to start. But typically what we've been seeing is that they'll go through and they'll do a pilot. So they'll take like 1 or 2 people from, and I highly recommend taking 1 or 2 people from each part of the organization, right? A couple people from HR, a couple people from executive, a couple people from financial, ops, sales, all the way down. Whatever your organization is, just take a group of people in the pilot group, let them work with Copilot and let them see what the return on investment could be, right? And see what a return of value could be for that. Right? And just remember, there's multiple ways to experience Copilot, as I showed you. There's Copilot in Windows if you're using the Windows device. There's Copilot in Edge that can be used in the Edge browser. And then if you have the licensing for it, it's Copilot for 365. All right? And you can also use something called Teams Premium, which will give you a recap of the meeting. And then the Copilot also has that feature built into it as well. Okay, I'm just going to briefly talk about some licensing options, because if you want to have Copilot for 365, you have to have a prereq license, and it has to be one of these. And that the good news is it's pretty much almost any license. I mean, most licenses include the ability for you to take a user who has one of these licenses and stack Copilot for 365 on top of it. The thing is that depending, and I'll call out a few of them here, the Office E3 and the Office E5 and actually some of these other SKUs, the Microsoft, a lot of these SKUs offer data governance controls, and some of them, depending on what license structure you have, are higher than others. Okay, and then on the business side, these are usually the business SKUs. So there's the SMB SKUs. The Business Premium one offers the most data governance protection, if you will. Okay, so as part of this conversation, you may want to be looking at what license you have, depending on, and if it meets your requirement, then you're good, and then you can help. That can help you roll out Copilot. It'll give you the controls for that. And just in case you're in the education space, those are the A SKUs. All right, and again, I pretty much already showed this, but Business Premium, Microsoft E3 and E5 are going to have the highest level of controls, and that's going to, even if you don't do Copilot, it's going to help you from a data governance perspective. But if you have them and you implement them, then you're ready for Copilot. Okay, you're more ready for Copilot, if you will. I just want to talk about a couple things, right? We're going to talk about the next steps, okay? If you have a data governance strategy in place, you're good. You've got things ready for Copilot, fire it up and start using it. And then it just comes down to user adoption, learning how to prompt and things like that. There's definitely some things that you're going to want to do. We talked about some of that. I recommend potentially, if you need it, looking at working with a partner, somebody like Data Link Networks, somebody that is an expert in this that can help you roll it out. And there's just some things that you're going to want to consider, right? And really also is the other side of this could be end user training, right? So if they were to see a demo of Copilot, or if they were going to go and watch some videos, or even do it like an in-person training, right? Some sort of user adoption, so that you get the tool and you're able to get like maximum value from it, because you know how to use it. So that's really important. So thank you for this. Thank you for joining us today. This is kind of the end of this part of the presentation.